It started with my grandmother, who would take me to art classes on Saturday mornings. And all the way down on the bus and the streetcar, so that tells you how old I am. It was like, look at that building, look at that building. See how pretty that cornice is. Did you see that sculpture above that? What color was that building? Oh, it was red. No, it wasn't. You know, go back and look again. And I'm like, yes, 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 yes. It was like my neck was sore after talking to my grandmother on the streetcar line, you know. Looking at buildings, looking at brick. She started the whole thing with loving the building around you. Because I was always wanting to go to faraway places, which I did eventually do, and I said, wow, this is pretty, it's the same thing, it was almost. You know? Because the quality of the everyday home in St. Louis, as far as the look and the feel, was so much superior to so many other places that I visited. Brick absorbs sunlight. Brick in the afternoon is one thing. Brick in the fall is different than brick, the same brick in June. You get the colors, just, it absorbs color to the point that it just inspires you, and you can play and you can do almost anything on brick in a painting, and it's true, because at some point it will be there. Seeing a building will be pink in the morning, and it'll have subtle shadows in between the lines of the brick. And then in the later afternoon, you'll have a golden wall facing you, and it's the same building. What more could you want? I mean, it's wonderful source material. And you have a freedom there. You know, nobody's going to say, that can't be, that's not what my building is. I said, go there on a February 20th, and it is.
Brick by brick,
Brick by brick,
brick by brick,
brick by brick,
they built this city brick by brick. Build it on up, tear it on down, pack 'em on in, ship 'em all around. They built this city brick by brick.
day by day,
Day by day,
day by day.
day by day, we live our city day by day.
One day till the next day it's gone. History shows right from wrong.
We live this city day by day. Year by year,
Year by year,
year by year,
year by year.
this city's growing older year by year. The spirit of our city's in these old brick walls. We lose a piece each time one falls. A city's growing older year by year. Brick by brick,
brick by brick,
brick by brick,
brick by brick.
they built this city brick by brick. Build it on up, tear it on down, pack 'em on in, ship 'em all around. They built this city brick by brick. Well, they built this city brick by brick.
Probably only 2 or 3 other cities in the United States that have the preponderance of brick that you would find in St. Louis. And those are cities like Philadelphia, Boston, and New York. And oftentimes people look at the city initially and the region in total amazement because it contrasts so vividly with wherever they're from, largely because of the extensive use of brick.
Seeing so much great brick really says a lot about the ecology of this region. It's an expression of what really lies beneath the soil. And it's remarkable that we've been able to build so many great buildings here. There seems to be this never-ending supply of clay, at least for our ancestors who were building the city when it was at its peak of construction. And so to me that all ties back into our placedness, our rootedness in the Mississippi Valley. And the soil that we have that's so rich in the red and the yellow clay that you see here.
Even before the Civil War, this was a brick city, and you will find descriptions of the city that explain that you are surrounded by brick. It is what's special about St. Louis. It is a building material like no other in its subtle variations, in how it has evolved in the last 150 years. And it gives St. Louis a permanence, an architecture like other cities do not have. It has given our buildings the stability to have survived, in many cases, generations of neglect, that they could then, even after all this neglect, be restored. And because of that, we have a Victorian city. So it is what makes St. Louis special and unique.
And the story of brick in St. Louis is a story that has its roots in the years just after the Louisiana Purchase. As early as the 18-teens, people were actually building homes of brick, although at that time it was a fairly soft brick that was handmade and hand molds.
So brick, first appeared in St. Louis in the 1820s, late 1820s, early 1830s. It wasn't very widely used until about the 1840s. And all of that early brick technology was, literally digging a clay pit, extracting it from the earth by human hands, pressing it into wooden molds by human hands, firing very simple kilns. And a lot of the early, pre-Civil War and post-Civil War buildings were made that way. And a lot of that mining happened on site or very near the site of the building being built. So there were, At one point I think about 90 different clay pits around the city, all being used to build up the areas around them.
We have the good fortune of having clay. There was enough easily accessible and mineable clay that we could have a brick city.
So in the St. Louis area, you find clay deposits all over, surrounding on all sides. And in fact, right in the heart of the region, you can find really fine deposits of clay.
The brick-making industry here was really part of, was just a single component in a clay working industry. There was also refractories made for furnaces, which is similar technologies, but different. It was the sewer pipe companies that were here that were very, very large. The one company in Cheltenham, Evans and Howard, was the largest single devoted sewer pipe plant in the world. It was really a clay industry. Brick was the largest component in that industry.
Another occasion that really led to the increasing use of brick in St. Louis was an absolute tragedy that occurred in the city of St. Louis in 1849. In 1849, if you'd been down along the levee, you would have seen dozens and dozens of steamboats nose in along the levee. And those steamboats were tied up right next to each other. A fire broke out on the steamer White Cloud. It released from its moorings. It flowed down the river, crashing into other steamboats along the levee as it went, spreading fire from one boat to another. Eventually, the fire jumped from the boats onto the buildings and the goods along the levee, and most of downtown St. Louis disappeared. It was from that time on that the city planners and city government really mandated that brick be used as a principal means of constructing homes as well as businesses in St. Louis so as to make them as fireproof as it was possible to do in those days.
But St. Louis was already destined to become a clay colossus by that time, by the 1849 fire. So it just probably added fuel to the already established traditions here of brick and stone and terracotta, of building a masonry city.
There's all sorts of talk about ordinances, and there were ordinances, and there were subdivision requirements in some cases for brick construction. But ultimately, we were the envy of all these other cities because we had the clay that we could make the brick right here.
I believe the gentleman's name was James Russell, and he had a large estate just south of Tower Grove Park.
The Russell family was thinking of selling the land, and then they realized after a gully washing rainstorm and they saw black seams in the ground that there was coal nearby, and they started mining coal.
And he was mining coal on his property and was drilling a water well that went deeper than where the coal seam was, and he found this really nice white-looking clay. And his brother happened to be visiting him from Pennsylvania, and he saw this clay and he said, "Man, this is really valuable stuff. We find this in Pennsylvania, And we think that you ought to take some samples and see if this is mineable quality.
So then they started mining the clay and created the Christie Brickworks, and a major industry in that area. From there all the way over to Kings Highway.
Well, the clay that's Pennsylvanian in age was once all over the city of St. Louis. However, as geologic time progressed, most of that was eroded away. There is a geologic feature called the Cheltenham Syncline. It roughly runs from Forest Park to the southeast about 4 miles, and it's about 2 miles wide, and it's a trough. A syncline is a trough it's a name geologists use. So it folded the rock after it was deposited in Pennsylvanian time, and then it eroded off, and then that Pennsylvanian clay was left in the trough. And it's very localized. That's where all the underground mines were located, were right on top of that trough area.
The largest brick factory was at the corner of Kings Highway in Manchester, and the Hydraulic Brick Company. And that was one of the largest in the entire United States. Now, they primarily made the red building brick. They also made paving stones, and they're very thick and large, just a little bit larger than a regular brick. And paving stones, like the yellowish fire brick, tend to have the names in them. So I've got a number of the hydraulics, some with little knobs on them and some without knobs, that I found around the city. But that was probably the largest. Now, the next two were Laclede Christie, which is sort of underneath where the Hampton Viaduct is now, and then the Evans and Howard, which was on West Park. And though they were both major makers, the two major makers of the fire brick in the United States, and they sent it all over. Though Laclede also made some red brick, but that wasn't their major source. So those were the three giant companies that were here in Dogtown. There were several other smaller ones. Some made the red brick and some made the fire brick.
And you know, one of the reasons that the clay industry flourished so much in St. Louis was really not necessarily related to the raw material that was there. One of those was, here they were out in the Midwest, you know, the gateway to the West, and there was a lot of need for construction materials. And it really made sense to go ahead and make brick in St. Louis rather than shipping it from the East Coast. The fact that the fire clay was there to make fire brick was also a huge plus, because they could construct their kiln right there on their property, and they did not have to import any of that expensive fire brick. Also had coal. In St. Louis, coal had been mined since the early 1820s. It was sitting right on top of the clay. It could be mined when the clay was mined, and it was used to fire the kiln. So it was no extra expense. So they had cheap fuel. It was also just a wonderful shipping area. You had the Missouri River, you had the Mississippi River, and you had rail facilities that all could be used to move not just the raw product, but the manufactured product all over the country.
You know, a lot of areas in the country don't have clay beds. You know, you can't make brick. And it costs too much money to bring it in. So you end up with sand lime industries, you know, making cement brick. A lot of cities are built out of that. Chicago didn't have any clay beds. You end up with that, what they call the Chicago Common. It's probably the worst looking brick ever manufactured. Most of the buildings in Chicago were built out of it. You know, any red brick that you see there had to come from clay beds in Indiana, you know, or St. Louis. It just didn't exist there, you know.
In this neighborhood, the St. Cecilia's Historic District, we have an abundance of houses that I call bakery brick houses, because they have white glazed brick woven into the brick facades of the houses, making extraordinary designs. Usually the lower part of the facade is entirely covered in this white brick. And the brick was made primarily for the interiors of breweries, bakeries, dairies. And this brick is almost always on working class houses in this area. My theory is that there was a big contract for a huge user of this white glazed brick, that the contract fell through. And then these contractors got an abundance of this brick and then had to figure out how we're going to use it. And they made up a new style of architecture with it, basically. But this brick and these houses created a great deal of pride. There was tremendous pride in home ownership and in owning a brick home. And these white glazed bricks, they just glowed. And on several streets where we have an abundance of them, the ladies of the house used to get out on Saturday mornings, and along with scrubbing their steps, they scrubbed, or they didn't really scrub, they polished the fronts of their homes with Bon Ami so that their white brick would glow and reflect the sun even brighter. And just the whole image of the scrubby Dutch, this carries it a whole step further with scrubbing the front of your house.
In a house like this, the walls are 3 withes of brick. It's a completely solid wall. Most homes today are built with a wood frame wall, and the brick just kind of hangs on the wood frame like wallpaper. And so while the brick typically does support itself, it's not the structure of the house. They would just fall down if the wood frame wall wasn't there.
There were dozens upon dozens of brick factories right here. We were making the stash. So we had an endless supply to pick from, which is why so many of our buildings are so different and have so much character.
The fact that the brick was produced in St. Louis meant that there was no transportation cost involved in using brick on buildings. That made it much more affordable, and that meant that in St. Louis you see the same beautiful brickwork, the craftsmanship, the finely made brick used on 4-family flats and apartment buildings as you see on great mansions and great office buildings downtown. It made this wonderful material and the outstanding craftsmanship part of everyday working communities.
But of course, none of that would mean much without the architects, and especially the lesser known draftsmen and builder contractors who built up a lot of the vernacular buildings around the city. The people who weren't members of the American Institute of Architects, whose names you see on building permits and they don't get written about. Those were people who, were building, sometimes hundreds of buildings a year. And they were so inventive, and they used this brick in ways that really had never been seen in this country before. And I think that all kind of forms the identity of when we think about what St. Louis is architecturally. I think we think about all of that amazing brickwork that you see on the most common buildings, on a one-room, little tiny shotgun house that's got a beautiful, amazing cornice or a round window arch that is every bit as elegant as a skyscraper downtown or the great architecture of the world. And it really fits into these broader patterns of civilization and the development of technology, and it filters down to probably everyone's block. I mean, it's hard to live anywhere in this region without being close to a beautiful brick building.
What most people would notice would be the diverse use of designs in brick facades. You rarely ever see two alike. And that was probably largely due to the brick contractors or the non-architect designed buildings that were built by a contractor. You probably wouldn't see that high quality of brickwork done in any other city. Probably 70% of Soulard predates the introduction of ornamental brick. If you go into neighborhoods that were built later, like Benton Park, neighborhoods that were built, there's a ring of them around the city that were built between 1885 and 1895. Say a 10-year period, you're probably going to see the best examples of ornamental brickwork that were done in the traditional red brick. Now, when you get into the classical revival period, say 1915 to 1925 or 29, you'll see the introduction of a lot of different types of textured brick in a period that they refer to as the Renaissance Revival, where the old red brick and the old ornamental red brick designs were sort of considered old-fashioned. You'll see, a whole new discovery of how to use brick in the sort of Renaissance style. You really end up with different layers of technology, different layers of design and style and application, and it's really kind of an encyclopedia of the history of the use of brick in the United States. I mean, you can see it all here in St. Louis.
You will see different brick structures and different brick patterns in St. Louis that you will not see anyplace else. There's certain features like these, they'll build an eyebrow. It's called an eyebrow that's usually over the top of a window. But in St. Louis, they build one that bisects the top of a window, then goes over and continues on. And you only see that in St. Louis. And that's because the builders just had an endless supply of beautiful stuff to work with and could take chances doing that butter brickle or doing X's or doing diamonds. They could even choose from different colors. So you'll see buildings here that have multiple colors of bricks on them. And that's what gives us so much character.
To me, the brick architecture of St. Louis adds a kind of richness to the built environment that a lot of cities don't have. I mean, obviously the buildings, appear more solid and are more solid than their frame counterparts.
Well, in some neighborhoods, we have a soft brick, a handmade brick. It often has a more red-orange color to it. It's kind of a grainy texture, and it has a very soft glow to it. Though the color is bright, it reflects light in a very soft fashion. After the Civil War, we have the introduction of steam power, and steam power allowed for the mixing of a finer clay that made for a harder brick. And that hard brick has a very hard edge to it, very smooth, but you will see a lot of variations in color in that. It also enabled using molds for the brick, that you could have brick with all these delightful designs in the brick itself. And at the same time, St. Louis was becoming a major brick producer. So for instance, hydraulic press brick had over 200 variety of brick in their catalog. And if you didn't like the brick that was available, you could custom design your own brick or have them design a brick for you and have your own special brick. At the turn of the century, we start to see more of a speckled brick between about 1900 and 1910. You see honey-colored brick with these dark black specks in it that is distinctive just of that era, and it gives the buildings a different texture and look. Sometimes you'll see the lower wall of a two-family or a two-story house done with one shade of brick or a speckled brick, and then above the lintel course you'll see a different shade of brick or a different texture to it. In St. Louis from about 1907 through our entrance in World War I, there is a small use of glazed brick on the exterior of houses. It's very specific to a specific time, and just in a few neighborhoods. It is extraordinary. Then in the 1920s, you see a lot of use of matte or textured brick that has a very rough finish to it that is supposed to look man-made, even though it's not man-made. That was the goal, to give things a more pre-industrial look. You also see in the 20s and 30s a variety of textures, again to give a pre-industrial look, that was used for both arts and crafts style houses and for revival style buildings.
In 1967, I was made president of Hydraulic Press Brick Company, and I held that job up to the year 2000, and I finally said, I'll never learn this job, I quit.
Probably the single largest factor concerning St. Louis's position in the United States in terms of a brick capital was the Hydraulic Press Brick Company.
The founder of Hydraulic Press Brick, Mr. Sterling, in Cleveland, Ohio, worked for a foundry, and his associate, Mr. Rogers, he had developed a hydraulic press. Sterling and Rogers came to St. Louis with a hydraulic press after the Civil War in '66, and then formed the present Hydraulic Press Brick Company in 1868.
They developed a process for hydraulically, under very high pressure, compacting clay in molds to make brick before it was fired. And the advantage of the hydraulic press brick was that it was more compact, it was denser, it was less likely to break up, and it held sharper corners as you used it for construction. So you'll find press brick of all kinds all over St. Louis in various categories.
When James Eade was evaluating materials for the Eads Bridge, he had tested a great number of building materials, all types of different stone, the handmade brick and the hydraulic press brick. And he found that the hydraulic press brick was a superior material in crushing ability. And you'll find hundreds of thousands of hydraulic press brick in the Eads Bridge.
It grew to be the largest brick manufacturer in the world.
Their influence was probably the greatest influence in American architectural history. Not only did they produce the first successful dry press brick, which was revolutionized brick making, they also introduced different types of brick, textures of brick, enameled bricks.
Hydraulic Press Brick Company was a leader in making glazed brick in the early years, even before the glazed tile came into being. And that was a special art unto itself, where the clay body was twice fired. You fired the brick, then you applied the glaze, and then fired again.
I guess because of the fact that they were located here in St. Louis really got the benefit of all of this, as opposed to any other city in the United States.
You go to a city like Chicago. Chicago doesn't really have a lot of clay, and that comes from a lot of it from Indiana, and it's a yellow clay. It's kind of a dirty looking clay. But they would do the front wall in a red brick from St. Louis, probably purchased through hydraulic press. And so they set up these branch offices and sold their product all over the Midwest. So that company literally built St. Louis and built up a lot of other cities.
By 1890, their records of production showed that most of the brick was shipped out of St. Louis that they manufactured here. And to overcome the distance to the eastern markets, they ended up buying plants and eventually owned some 20 manufacturing facilities from Washington, D.C. to New York, Chicago, Ohio. I mean, they pretty much covered the entire eastern marketplace, but which before was completely unheard of.
We closed the last dry press plant in 1967 out on Higgy Road. There was clay mining out there, and those were still a viable product, even somewhat viable after the war, because of special uses like sewer brick. So what money hydraulic did have was going back in the more profitable light wood aggregate part of the business.
The whole brick industry was incredibly labor intensive. It wasn't only the removal of the clay from the mines and then the making of the bricks in the brick kilns and the brick companies, but it also had to do with the very nature of brick. If you were going to pave a street or you were going to build a house, it wasn't like taking a dump truck load or a truckload of concrete and dumping it into a form. Bricks are fragile, and so bricks had to be handled by hand. They had to be loaded on wagons and carts by hand, and you couldn't just pull up to a street where the street was being paved and just dump the brick. The bricks had to be unloaded one by one and stacked so that they didn't break in the process of being moved from one place to another. The process of building a building of brick involved moving those bricks again and then toting them. The work was called a hod carrier, toting them up ladders or scaffolds to the point where they could actually be used in the construction of the structure.
Oh, the bricklayers. They were extraordinary. Here, they organized the first local in 1864. That was before the International was formed. We had large numbers of German bricklayers, and I have found evidence of Bohemian bricklayers also. A lot of the Irish were hod carriers for the many German bricklayers. And you can see the character of the early German neighborhoods is still there. The places where these folks lived, like in the Soulard neighborhood, in Benton Park neighborhood. And the streets, as soon as they could pave them, they paved them with brick. There was brick all around in those wonderful brick churches and lots of taverns. You walk down those streets and you can imagine the social life that evolved among the bricklayers that were creating these great works of art. They worked extremely long hours, hard physical work. They lived in all craftsmen in small apartments or small houses, very small by today's standards. Their social lives revolved around ethnic churches, taverns, and early on, around coffee houses. There were a lot of coffee houses in mid-19th century St. Louis. And so rather than having all your social life at home, the social life revolved around community gathering places.
Years ago, I interviewed a couple of guys that fathers and grandfathers were bricklayers and offered some insights into the industry that I had never seen published anywhere. But apparently there were bricklayers and then there were front men. And the front men, they did the fronts of the buildings. And then the bricklayers laying up the common brick laid up the side walls and did all the partitions of the building. But apparently these front men, most of which were Englishmen, they came to work with their derbies and set up their own scaffolding, had their own hod carriers, and they would build the fronts of the buildings. They would do the front work only. And they were apparently pretty elitist group of bricklayers.
Our unions in the bricklaying fields were similar to medieval guilds. They were not just a bargaining force. They handled what we call today quality control, and they taught the skills involved in brickwork, just like a medieval guild taught skills and maintained a quality of craftsmanship.
The end of the brick industry, at least in the construction trades, was highly skilled. Bricklayers were a different breed from the people who mined the clay or the people who actually made the brick. The bricklaying was a very complicated, a job that required an awful lot of expertise.
For instance, in St. Louis, it was required that bricklayers learn, or before they were bricklayers, apprentices learned to build 7 different kinds of arches. In other cities, maybe they learned 3 kinds of arches.
The idea of knowing how to build different kinds of archways, the idea of knowing the different kinds of patterns and courses of brick, knowing how to match brick, knowing how to calculate a brick wall which is wider at the bottom and narrower as it goes up.
They learned to do corbelling. That was incredibly important. Corbelling is a balancing act with brick. That enabled them to have bricks project from walls in designs or be recessed in designs. This turned the facades of buildings into canvases, and the bricklayers were the artist.
Well, when I first came to City Hall, they named me the Brick. Before I became an alderman, I would observe buildings being torn down without the proper permits. And we thought the buildings were actually falling down. But when you go to a site where there's no side or no rear or in a building, the bricks are down, you only find what we call brick bats. That's half or little pieces of bricks. You won't see a whole brick. I was curious about that, and I would always see these guys stacking them.
Years ago, nobody ever bothered because brick were not as expensive as they are today. For a few years, St. Louis builders stopped using it. The Masonry Institute here issued a memo to all the developers and contractors that they were having these big problems with all these homes they built out in West County that were deteriorating. The brick was deteriorating because they were laying up the soft inner brick on the facades of these homes, and the freeze-thaw cycles had finally, over a 10, 15-year period, it started to deteriorate all the brick. So St. Louis builders stopped using used brick, and the market for used brick became really slow.
The brick thievery has been a big epidemic in the last 5 or 6 years, bigger than maybe it's ever been. And a lot of it was due to the housing bubble and a lot of new construction in Sunbelt cities that really like the recycled brick for front elevations, veneer facades, that sort of thing. And that really drove the price of reclaimed brick up to a point it hadn't reached in a long time, and really spurred on local thieves.
You've got brick dealers that don't care where they get their brick from. And the guys bring it in and pickup truckloads, and they know that they're looting some building somewhere. Profit motive is too great. It was used to be used brick were about $110 a thousand. Now they're $350 a thousand, something like that. There's profit in it now. And with the economy the way it is, and people are out of work, it's just a big temptation. When they see an empty building sitting there that nobody seems to care about, it's not boarded up. They're just going to take the brick, and as long as there's brick dealers that'll buy it from them, you're going to have all these buildings coming down. Now you've got other dealers in the United States coming into St. Louis, eliminating the middleman.
I see trucks from Louisiana. I see trucks from Mississippi. So we have inherited these guys coming from other states, coming in here because it's so easy to do and nobody's getting caught.
And the way it works is, the vacant brick buildings are targeted, and thieves will come in, cause some damage, or knock down a wall or two, often in areas like parts of North St. Louis that have high abandonment, high vacancy, so there are not a lot of eyes and ears to watch this going on. The methods can range from very crude.
Take a pipe, bend it, pick out a little hole in the side of the building, and then begin to pull.
They might drive a truck into a wall.
And once he pulled, a lot of times that whole wall come down. Sometimes we find these guys under this rubble of bricks.
Or take a sledgehammer and start at the base of a wall and basically knock out the bottom of the wall and then watch it fall over.
And they take that cement from around the brick, they pull the brick out, they tooth the brick like a snagger tooth, and then that's what makes that one hole and they're able to pull it out.
Or throw a rope around a chimney and get tied to the back of a pickup truck, drive forward.
And they're very, very fast. They can take an entire 2-story structure down, 50 feet by 30 feet, in less than a day's time.
Some of the more sophisticated operators will actually, in the middle of the night, drive a bobcat loader to the site and really beat the building up pretty badly. Some of the thieves will catch the buildings on fire.
They've made the fire department become the demolition team.
Get a really good blaze going with a nice accelerant.
And they set this fire in between the windows. So when the firemen come, this fire is burning so intense, they won't send the firemen inside. So they try to fight the fire from the outside. But when they're shooting their hose, they're missing the whole fire because it's going in this window and going in this window is not actually getting the area where they set the fire behind the brick. So then the fireman pressures his hose up.
Knowing that the pressurized spray will really erode that mortar and clean some of the brick.
And in the morning, you'll see these guys creep up and begin to get the bricks. Well, why are you taking these bricks? I didn't know, we were just cleaning them up, getting them off the sidewalk. Well, the city have their own team of workers that can do this. We don't need you taking our bricks. I was showing a developer the other day some buildings that we were thinking about him developing. And when we went to the alley, there were no backs in any of them. And we didn't even know it. It's just devastating. And when they finish with these buildings, they look just like the doll houses that my sister played with when they were small. Anything that was left inside of that interior of that building, you can see.
What's so amazing is that the people are hoodwinked into the mere fact that they feel and they think that it's because of the building, the age of the buildings, that the deterioration that they fell in because of the age of the building. But they got to think about, most of these buildings were built in 1904, 1800, 1927, and things like that, and it's the same buildings that they live in. So if that was the case, their buildings, the back would be falling out of their buildings as well where they live. The backs haven't fell out of their buildings, so these buildings did not fall, they did not collapse.
We have one block, the 4500 block of Kennerly. They stole the entire block on both sides of the street. Both sides of the street.
And these were taken all the way down the entire block. They set the wooden ones on fire to make people think that it's a firebug in the community. But they do these to make people deception, to make you feel that they're not just setting the brick ones on fire and that the brick theft is not happening.
And the police aren't taking it as seriously as they should. They've got other things to think about, other, more important crime to deal with, so.
It's difficult. I've spent a lot of time phoning in brick thievery, only to have the police just not even show up, or they'll show up and say, well, the guys tell me they're a demolition crew and they have the rights to tear the building down, and they won't check for building permits. They say it's the building division's job. There have been whole blocks that have been taken down. There's one block in particular in St. Louis Place, 1900 block of Wright Street, that in a 6-month period, every building on the street was destroyed by brick thieves. Nobody did anything to stop it. I would sit there in my car watching them, calling the police, never get a response.
Officers, to me, get embarrassed by the mere fact that, what did you do today? I'm a police officer. What did you do today? Well, I caught a couple of brick thieves. You want to catch murderers and burglars and that type of thing. You run around chasing brick thieves. But that is a major part of the city's function. I used to approach them, but I don't get too close to them anymore. I kind of stay back off of them and might holler, hey. I said, why are you guys taking these brick lights? We got to make a living. I said, but you're tearing up my city and you're tearing up my ward. Well, man, we don't know who you are, but, we're here. We're just trying to make a living, man. So he was like, come on, let's go. So they were in a Ford Explorer. The driver got in, started it up, and started driving away. And the two people that was with him was jumping in with, he's going down the street, and they running and jumped in. There were 3 more people standing behind me. these guys are very dangerous. And I believe that if I hadn't have said that the police were coming, and I wear my badge, I have an automatic badge that I wear. And I showed them my badge. I said, I'm the alderman here. But I believe that if I hadn't have said what I said, that the police was on their way, one of them probably would have hit me in the head. So if we've been boarding these buildings up, we could save these buildings, and the city can make a lot more money with the development because we have a better structure to sell people that want to rehab these buildings or individuals that want to get these buildings. These buildings are too important, too beautiful.
You know, as much as I've spent time calling in the guys who are doing the stealing, well, you know, if no one would buy the stuff, that would deter the theft. So it's really those dealers that the first initial point of contact, those are the guys we really need to go after. And the city really needs a better law to crack down on that.
I think the city should keep their own brick, that we should come up with a program of better enforcement, because we're building a lot of houses with just a brick veneer front, where we can veneer all four sides to make it a much more enticing sale. And I think that we need to layer the penalties more. $500, you give these guys a ticket and they never show up in court. I think that if a guy take out a wall, a 20 by 20 wall, and you estimate the square footage based on rehab at $65 a square foot or to $85 a square foot, that should be the fine assessed to this guy. That penalty should be placed on him. If it's $20,000 or $10,000, then that's what he should have to pay for stealing that piece of property. And if he don't have the money, so let's give him, say if he do $15,000 worth of damage, I think he should get a year for $5,000. So that means he should do 3 years if he did $15,000 worth of damage to that property. These buildings are too important to this city for us to have these buildings stole like this.
So you better believe stories out there tell you about the brick thief, about the brick thief. I mean, the ones burning buildings down around the city. What a pity. Then they take the brick and they sell it around the country in exchange for drug money. Won't somebody please do something about the brick thief? Policeman, what a man, runs around making busts all over town. So walks right back to the station bragging about another one that he brought down. While men unloading up trucks with bricks from buildings that they burned out. I tell St. Louis we ought to have had enough. Well, you better believe stories out there tell you about the brick thief, about the brick thief. I mean, the ones burning buildings down around the city. What a pity, yeah. Then they take all the brick men, what they do? Well, they set it around the country in exchange for drug money. Won't somebody please do something about the brick thief? So you better believe all the stories. Yes, you better believe all the stories they tell about the brick thief, about the brick thief. I mean, the ones who burn buildings down around the city. What a pity. Oh, then they take all the brick, what they do? They sell it around the country in exchange for drug money. Won't somebody they do something? Right now, you ain't doing nothing. Won't somebody please do something about the brick thief?
Here at the Land Clearance Authority, the men who are making the St. Louis of tomorrow plot out our futures. Here, in collaboration with the City Planning Commission, city departments, and the Board of Education, skilled planners, engineers, and other technicians lay out the step-by-step elimination or rehabilitation of a city unit. Here, coldly charted on graphs and maps, is the timetable of destruction. But once the old has been torn down, the builders come in to make a better St. Louis by rehabilitating and rebuilding.
If you lived in St. Louis in the 1950s, you know, you sort of grew up around the bulldozers and the demolition, so that was always a constant activity that you know, you couldn't miss. When they were demolishing Mill Creek, my mother belonged to a bowling team over there somewhere off of Forest Park. While they were bowling, I would go adventure off into some of these areas that were being demolished. This was my first experience with demolition on a mass scale. And I thought it was fascinating that they were taking down whole neighborhoods. St. Louis was the first city to really engage in large-scale urban renewal projects in the United States. So, you know, it's been part of the culture here. Demolition is part of the culture here. And, you know, to make that break, you know, it's been a struggle and continues to be a struggle. I guess I started collecting, you know, on a small scale when I was just a kid, you know, going through abandoned buildings and finding things that were neat, taking them home. I started an architectural salvage company in 1972. Almost immediately began setting aside artifacts I thought deserved public recognition to become part of the long envisioned Museum of American Architecture that was planned for the riverfront area. So the project really began pretty much shortly after, say about 72 or 3. I'd already started a collection earmarked for the museum project. And to subsidize the collecting, I had an architectural salvage business. I supplied materials to rehabbers that were involved in restoration of old buildings. And I ran that company up until about 3 years ago when I closed up, and now I've pretty much dedicated, you know, my entire time to working on the Architecture Museum.
Well, I think that brick is the symbol of St. Louis's low self-esteem. And one of the classic traits of low self-esteem is that you do not understand or value the things that are important or worthy about you. And for instance, the very foundation of our city is built on brick. And it's built on brick that came out of the clay that's underneath our feet. The topography of our city, they pulled that clay out, formed them into bricks, and created one of the strongest and most enduring industries in St. Louis. An industry that was vitally important for both the financial and physical development of the city. Interestingly enough, though, people outside of St. Louis, they get it completely. Now, the city of St. Louis is always building these bright new shiny toys trying to impress outsiders, but how many times have you had out-of-town visitors immediately get excited about how beautiful this city is? They talk about all of our beautiful buildings and all of this history, and these buildings that the majority of them are built out of brick, right? It gets even more ironic because in St. Louis, they will build brand new structures out of brick. Like, for instance, the newest Busch Stadium, right? This retro brick structure that they built with brick that they bought out of state that has no personality, and they ship it in. Where at the same time that they're building this new brick structure, which they purposely say, we've built it out of brick because it respects the history and character of St. Louis, while they're tearing down all of these houses in North St. Louis and shipping that brick out of state.
I would say we've had mixed results in preservation. I mean, certainly the passage of the historic tax credit back in 1998 was a huge positive thing for preservation in St. Louis. In the early 1990s through the mid 1990s, we lost a lot of buildings, like the Ambassador Building, the Olympia Apartments. There's just I could name a dozen major buildings that came down in that decade that just had no reason to come down. They were solid buildings, and they obviously needed to be renovated, but the historic tax credit made the economics of renovation make a lot more sense, and St. Louis has taken advantage of that and has basically become one of the major leaders in the country in terms of historic preservation of buildings.
Well, there's always the issue of the tax credit for developers, subsidies for conservation of cities. It's that seems to me probably the biggest issue is the financing for preservation.
Yeah, it's kind of a bipolar situation because St. Louis has more buildings in the city limits listed in the National Register of Historic Places than any other major American city. And a lot of that's because of our Missouri Rehabilitation Tax Credit, where buildings have to be listed in the National Register before they can get tax credits for redevelopment. And that spurred a lot of preservation and changed the game for us. There was a lot of support from the development community that we didn't have 10 years ago. We have a very strong preservation community that has longevity. We have a Landmarks Association was incorporated in 1958. So, we have an organization that's over 50 years old. So we are known for being a very strong preservation city. The problem comes in back to, public policy in the region. So the big threats I see come from lack of comprehensive citywide preservation review in the city of St. Louis. Also lack of creative funding for surveying areas that are losing the most buildings.
We need these historic neighborhoods. We need them desperately. We need them as a culture. They define us. In this nation, part of our definition of ourselves comes from our landscape. Another part of it comes from our built environment. And when we build things that in 20 years turn to trash, that's a very bad definition of ourselves.
In reality, every time a building goes down, every time a brick building is torn down and the bricks are shipped and reused somewhere else, we've lost a little bit of our memory. We've lost a little bit of the messages from the past that tell us who we are and where we came from. We also lose something of the aesthetic message, the message that says, we folks in the 19th century built solidly. We built things to last. And bricklayers and other artistic people created things of beauty because they thought that things of beauty were important things to have around us, that they uplifted our daily lives, that they were worth the expenditure of time and energy. So every time we lose something, a little bit of forgetting goes on. And my concern is that there's a point at which we forget too much and we lose the connection, and we forget that we live with the consequences of the choices for good and ill that prior generations made we also forget that the choices we make about what to build, how to build it, where to build it, and out of what to build it, as well as 1,000 other choices, are ones that our children and our children's children are going to have to live with for countless generations.
Raised on the edge of the city, kept moving farther on in, probably end up in the river, roll down to Memphis each day. Nightlife, no, she ain't no good life. The city, no, she ain't no saint. Daddy, no, he ain't no farmer. Yeah, my country ain't country at all. We're working hard on the south side, living for ribbon and bands, barbecue potluck on weekends, puking it up on the lawn. Honky's got plenty of talking. Whiskey's got plenty of dough. Cowboy's got plenty of cowbell. But our country ain't country at all. Plastic tumbleweeds blowing, gas fumes filling the air. Beautiful concrete landscape, far as the eye can see. Rising and shining at noontime, talking to coquettes till dawn. Life in my beloved country, my country ain't country